as we say, massive news broke 4 or 5 days ago now that the Glazers are looking to potentially sell. There's still a little bit of confusion for people. They heard one of the Glazers, I think it was Avram Glazer speak. Um, One of the Glazers spoke. I don't know which one it was. I don't know the first. I actually don't know their first names. If you line them in a row, I wouldn't know which one's which. I just call them all the Glazers. I'm terrible. But he spoke about how they're looking for multiple ways as well as selling. What are you hearing? Is it likely to be a full sale in your opinion?
Yeah, my understanding is that their preference is a full sale, and Rain Group, who are overseeing the sale, don't see any problem with finding a suitor or a number, which is going to be equally as important to at least present them with options. And from there, it will be up to the Glazers. But what they won't necessarily want is to surrender a healthy minority percentage to a big name or company and then potentially have a dynamic that gives them a little bit less control and authority, unless, of course, they decide that they're in it for the long game. With some of these big organizations, and we'll find this as well with American investment with PSG, you might find that a known global company prefers actually to take a smaller slice of the pie with a view after things progress and as the market changes to potentially then taking a majority or 100% stake. So that's a kind of halfway house. And I'm not saying that anybody is actively exploring it at this point, but I know talking to investor circles that there are big businesses, Redbird Capital is another good example, that actually prefer to almost do a try before you buy approach, where they take a lower risk minority stake in a club that they believe can grow. And then over time, they ask for a bigger stake or ultimately a majority stake, followed by full ownership. But the challenge with Manchester United in that approach is that there's a real feeling that the Glazers, as I suppose Cristiano Ronaldo hinted as well, are not as invested as they were a few years back. And part of that is down to the failed Super League. Part of it is down to the pandemic. And the Chelsea sale, I think, has shown a lot of big ownership groups that now is the right time to sell. And that is why, in an ideal world, the Glazers' preference will be, as I understand it anyway, a full sale.
That's very good to hear. And for me, just someone that's like a lot of people that probably saw that statement that have worked in a corporate job, it was like a long-winded letter to say the club's up for sale. But of course, you don't go out and just say that because, of course, you're trying to get the best deal possible. You don't want to appear desperate. You don't want to lower the valuation of the club in any way, shape, or form. I think Man United fans will be very happy with that indeed. Of course, there are many people linked to buying the club, and we're going to kind of go through them one by one for you, the viewers. So stay with us for it. The big name that's been connected for a long time, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Yesterday, it was announced that he would make a formal bid once the club is officially on the market. What's your understanding regarding Sir Jim, his bid, and the likelihood of him becoming the new owner of Man United?
Well, just before we come on to Sir Jim, because I think it's relevant, it's worth pointing out the process, because we're going to hear a lot about alleged bids and rival bids too. But this is not a fast process. Even a quick takeover is slow in terms of the time it will take. It's ultimately, at best, like having a kid. So 9 months would be a normal takeover without hitches. And nobody's entered into any kind of period of exclusivity. Nobody's done any due diligence. And the other key thing is Manchester United has been privately on the market for quite some time, on and off, putting feelers out there pretty much since the European Super League collapsed and the club didn't get a 1 billion bonus just for joining, which the Glazers were not necessarily banking on, but that would have been enough value, plus how that league developed, even though it was so unpopular, to keep them at the club because it was moving in a different direction. So they wanted the European Super League regardless of the U-turn, and that's because of the financial bounty that was at stake. And also that when they first joined, even though they embarrassingly had to change their stance, all of the Premier League clubs and the superpowers within European football were together and unified. So they were braced for a backlash, but together, and it fell apart very quickly. And just because the statement offers a public angle to all of this, it doesn't mean that from the perspective of Rain Group managing the sale and any prospective suitors, they will be alerted to it only because it's gone public and are suddenly huddling together and making offers. It's really important to stress that. It's not a transfer. So you don't just call up Rain Group if you have heard about it and say, we're interested, we'd like to offer X billion, let us know, thank you very much. It's a much more complex process. It is more rigid than people realize. So the only real difference between Chelsea and Manchester United is that Rain Group with Chelsea had to do things fast. And that was because Chelsea's very existence was under threat. And also, due to government involvement and Abramovich being forced out of the club, there was strict criteria, there was pledged investment, and it was about safeguarding Chelsea as well as selling it. Whereas with Manchester United, the Glazers can effectively just take the highest offer and have no real care as to who buys the football club. But the caveat to that is if they are genuinely exploring all options, they might end up working with whoever buys the club. And that's why I understand that within the process, there are quite clear guidelines. Non-credible suitors will be weaned out, and the price is kind of up for debate. And we might get a little bit of a bidding war, but there is a process to it. And even though the Glazers are not Roman Abramovich and Chelsea, there will be some similarities and some differences, as I've just outlined. So then as we talk about Sir Jim Ratcliffe, he has to abide by that process. And he hasn't done that with Manchester United to date, or during his time trying to hijack Clearlake Bowley and make a bid outside of Rain Group's process for Chelsea Football Club as well. And all of the noise, all of the fueling of rumours, and the fact that Ratcliffe is a lifelong Manchester United fan are one thing. So clearly he's going to explore the possibility, but he said this before. And he also said in October to the Financial Times that the club was not for sale. And in October, the Glazers were talking to other people privately before we knew about this in the public domain. And that kind of tells me that Ratcliffe is probably an outsider. He's not in the loop. This is a sale process made by Americans, largely for Americans. And Ratcliffe's going to have to kind of find a way of getting within the inner circle. And to do that, he also needs to show that he's prepared to meet the Glazers' valuation. And my understanding is that he's quite wary at the moment because it's a club that he desperately wants, but it's not at a price that he thinks is anywhere close to fair market value. And if it transpires, and especially with Liverpool up for sale as well, that there is a range of investors and suitors and groups that are prepared to get into a bidding war or see higher value in Manchester United, then even if Ratcliffe progresses, it will become a case of how high is he prepared to go. And I personally believe, unless he combines with another group, which could be a possibility, he won't go high enough. And that's why, even though it's being fueled, he continues now to say his focus is also on Nice. Whereas if you flash back a few months ago when the situation was less certain, he was much more bullish about wanting Manchester United. And now it's Manchester United is not for sale. I'm focusing on Nice. Suddenly it is for sale. So it's Ratcliffe's move. And I'm not sure at this stage that his valuation and the Glazers' valuation of Manchester United Football Club are going to be anywhere close.
And that makes a lot of sense. And when you start to move towards the other names heavily being linked with Man United from some credible sources now, the first of which got a lot of people excited. And I think the reason the excitement comes is because of the successes we've seen at Man City, the successes we've seen at PSG, and the radical turnaround of Newcastle. Money from the Middle East. There is Dubai that are looking to buy it, and that is I think it's the Investment Corporation of Dubai, which is essentially, as I understand it, that is sort of the most senior senior figures within that country. So essentially, is the country Dubai buying it, as it were. What's the latest in terms of their approach and their attempt, considering they're not kind of US based, as you mentioned?
I mean, they are US based in the sense that a lot of their portfolio managers operate out of New York. So any transaction could have a dollar denomination. Naturally, the Middle East is going to be linked, but Investment Corporation of Dubai, pretty coy and silent at the moment. There's a lot of excitement. There's pure rumor out there that they've made a bid in excess of $10 billion, but that is not my understanding. And again, nobody really, unless they've been talking for months to Manchester United, will be at the point of making an offer. It doesn't quite work like that. You have a valuation from the outside in, then you get due diligence, and you have to match that valuation from the inside out and negotiate and debate with the club. So it is true that anyone can come forwards and say, this is our valuation, we are prepared to make an offer of X. And if that X is above market value, you've clearly got a starting point, and a organization like Investment Corporation of Dubai wouldn't have any real problems showing proof of funds. But there's not as much in this one as is currently being reported. And that's largely because in the MENA region, the focus is, yes, on sport, especially around a range of different visions heading up to 2030. You'll see this in the UAE, you'll see it in Saudi Arabia, you'll see it in Qatar as well. But they don't just throw money at things so far above market value for the sake of it. So they have to believe, therefore, what they pay is going to provide an investment. And that investment is, yes, financial, but also strategic. And one example of that could be the tourism that owning Manchester United generates. So an Investment Corporation of Dubai may be one to watch. They're a sovereign wealth fund established by the government of Dubai back in 2006. And their sole mandate is to manage various portfolios of investments. And under their key leadership is the Crown Prince of Dubai, Hamdan bin Mohammed Al Maktoum. And therefore it will create a debate and perhaps a slight uncomfortableness amongst some Manchester United fans. Like Newcastle, as you mentioned, Manchester City, many will be excited by the sheer money, but the Premier League will once again have to do their due diligence. And the other thing to point out is Investment Corporation of Dubai don't have a great deal of experience within sport. And if they are involved in it, it's in a tangential sense or in a commercial capacity. And the final thing to say is just that there's politics. And within the UAE, the different emirates sometimes are unified and sometimes are separate. And with Manchester City being owned effectively out of Abu Dhabi, it might not sit right necessarily having Dubai ownership, especially with Arsenal's Emirates sponsorship as well. They're based in Dubai with Manchester United. And it's not to say that the Crown Prince of Dubai is going to say, okay, I won't buy Manchester United just because Abu Dhabi have got Manchester City. It's not quite like that, but it is important to understand that there is logistical, personnel, and commercial crossover between a lot of different senior figures, some of whom will be involved either officially or unofficially in some capacity with Manchester City or other projects in sport. And that's what makes it so difficult for the Premier League to do their due diligence when they look at the structure. But before anyone gets too excited about this, once again, Investment Corporation of Dubai have not tabled some bid that is billions above the market valuation or at the top end of what the Glazers might want. And when directly approached by me, at least, they have no comment at this stage. And that might be interesting because when you compare that to Liverpool, there were denials about Liverpool. With Manchester United, it's no comment at this stage. So they're one to watch. They obviously would have wealth, but I think it might divide the Manchester United fan base if they chose to proceed.
I think you're certainly right. It would divide people's opinion. Lots of people think very different things about money that comes from the Middle East. It creates a different debate as to whether or not you think they're going to run the club well, which there's always the possibility billionaires don't run a club well. I think, though, when you're parting with this kind of money, that anyone who wants to make an investment knows that if you give 6 billion, let's just say that's what it comes out as in the wash, the only way you're making that money back is by furthering the club and making them more successful. It's not like the Glazers that bought the club cheaply on a leveraged debt deal, didn't put any of their own money in. Even if the project financially failed for them and they could only sell it for £1 billion, they still would have made £1 billion from essentially nothing. Very different with the way the structure is now. There are a few comments here that I want to do. The English media is concerned about United is because it will be they will be out of a job soon once we have some sane owners. No negative things to post about Manchester United is what Nabil says here. Super says the Glazers are playing with you all. I see a huge we tried, but our best to sell on its way. Watch this space. That's from a City fan who may just be a little bit worried that Man United could have good owners again. We will see. We've got some more super chats from Troy and Nabil will come back to in a bit. One of the big ones today, and I mean, there seems to be some big journalists talking about it. Apple. Of course, Tim Cook being the CEO of Apple, but Apple looking to buy Manchester United, and essentially, although they're a corporation, they are valued or they have assets, as they say, at over $2 trillion. If they were looking to buy Manchester United, I'm sure that would include new stadiums and new tech, and everything would just be Apple. And I'm sure they would use Man United as essentially the biggest market employer ever to push Apple products. That would be part of it. But what's the latest as far as Apple and Tim Cook coming in and taking over at Manchester United?
Well, I think the thing to say about Apple, first of all, broadly, is that they have a huge appetite for investing in sports clubs as well as TV rights. And it's always been thought that their first venture into this area with an elite level club would be more in minority investment. And now there's the opportunity, certainly in the context of Manchester United, to talk to the club about both options, minority and majority investment. And I've always also been told that they're looking at other clubs around Europe to do exactly the same. And the difference with Apple or potentially Facebook or any of these so-called digital disruptors that have heavy online presences is that if you had ownership of a club, you would have the opportunity to exploit the club's own digital assets in a very different and innovative way. And I think it's very telling that those connected to Manchester United, and particularly Joel Glazer, I'm told, puts huge stock in the combination of this 1.1 billion fan base that was referenced with the potential of the digital assets. And with a partner like, say, Amazon, with the infrastructure to showcase Manchester United and run ads about Manchester United and sell things for Manchester United, and who knows, stream games for Manchester United. We know that Amazon already have some Premier League fixtures. All of that can provide a return on Amazon's buck. So from the outside in, you can understand why Amazon might see a strategic model for owning a big brand. And then from there, there'll be debates about things like conflict of interest. If they own Manchester United and then they're bidding for the Premier League rights, does that sit comfortably? But let's not forget, Nasser Al Khalifi is involved with beIN Sports, and beIN Sports air PSG games, including in the Champions League. And he's also the chairman of PSG. But naturally, QSI, the actual owners of PSG, and beIN Sports are not exactly the same. So there's a whole debate around there for further down the line, if anything progresses. But I think what's clear is that Amazon have had their interest piqued by investing in a football club in some capacity for quite some time. And it's very normal because they've been behind the scenes at clubs doing their documentaries, they've been airing football games. So what if they turn the tables and they actually owned a club? How can they commercialize that? And more so than ever, they would have more avenues to make a return.